the true crime occultist. I've actually been really excited and really looking forward to this. I do like getting Headless and BD on, and having them together is going to be definitely exciting for me. So, and this should be a fun episode, I think, too. And only because I have looked at the slides, I'm not exactly sure how we're getting to this one character, but we will be pulling somebody up. And it's just going to be interesting how we even got there. So I'm sure.
Oh, it for sure is very interesting how we get there. Yeah.
Awesome. Good. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yep.
Real quick before we get going, Lisa, do you want to let everybody know like where they can get in touch with you if they want to get in contact or anything?
Sure. On Twitter, Solis Lisa, or Instagram, Lisa Solis.
Yes, and she does actually post some interesting like science and animal stuff. No, I'm saying like it, if you know, it's definitely fitting, and I think it's worth looking at. Headless, let everybody know what's up with you and where they can find your amazing show as well.
You can find me on X and on YouTube. You can also tune into our spaces on Friday nights. This Friday, we're going to be talking about Asclepius and his daughters, and talking a little bit about medicine and how that applies. So,
yeah, I could have used you yesterday. Ethan Indigo was on with Jin, and they were going into like Asclepius and the Caduceus, and I think Ethan Indigo only knew like one of them, and I was like, I know Hellas has said there's a difference.
Yeah.
I might actually want to kind of go back to that topic and maybe cover it with you one day. Definitely interesting thing to look at. Headless's notes will be down on the bottom. If anybody wants to contact Lisa or follow her on Twitter and Instagram, that will be down at the bottom. And now, BD, what is going on, BD? Thank you very much for coming on and having this topic in mind. I appreciate it. And please let everybody know where they can find your stuff and get in contact with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. We're going to have a lot of fun this evening with various rabbit holes in the sky, I like to think of them. I am on X. I am on Instagram. I have a link tree, which should be below. And my website is strangebutTrueCrime.com. And it really is strange and true.
I love it. Awesome. Yeah, actually, I forgot. Yeah, we are live. All the links should be in there already, or I should have. I'm pretty sure I set that up. So I guess BD. I mean, again, this was your topic. Who's hijacking the cosmos?
Mm-hmm. The original title it strayed quite away from that. The original title was Asteroids and in Greek mythology. And it was that way for several days until I took a huge detour in my research and came up with some things that I thought were very, very important to bring to light. And I really didn't want to do a whole show just presenting asteroid positions in crime charts and how they relate to the crime at hand, because that could get excessive after a while. But it's a fascinating pivot that I made, and I think that it will be beneficial for people to know it. And that's why I changed the topic to who's hijacking the cosmos, because I think I figured out who is doing that, how they are doing that, and why. And it all starts with the asteroids that I was beginning to do for this show. So I'll just go a little bit into that. I will be very grateful for Headless's contribution to explaining some of the mythological characters I'm going to go into. Asteroids are basically planetoids. They're small bodies of matter that appear in mostly between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. They are not distant like the stars. They are within our solar system. They're basically chunks of Earth, metals. Some of them are just huge blocks of ice. And they go in certain patterns of orbit. They belong to certain belts. One huge one is the Apollo belt, which comprises many other asteroids, that some of which we'll talk about. And the interesting thing is planets represent qualities, characteristics, and experiences in a person's life. When you look at their astrology chart, that's what the planets do. They are descriptors. They are like the characters in a drama. The horoscope is the stage. The planets are the characters in the drama. And they play out through the person's life, various energies and incidents, qualities of life. The asteroids do the same thing as the planets, except they're smaller. They're much more specific. They are oriented specifically to the myth that they are named after. And that's what caught me, was how do you name this? And it ends up working out in someone's horoscope that it tells you these qualities of that specific person. And it does. And I've seen it time and again, and I'm going to give examples. But that is what drew me in. So anyway, there are over 1.2 million known asteroids, because like I said, some of them are just chunks of rock floating in space, orbiting the Earth or orbiting the sun. But they are being discovered and identified by science since 1801 was the first discovery of them. And it's an interesting trajectory how they were named and how subsequently their characteristics were found to bear out in people's horoscopes, and especially in my case, in the horoscopes of crimes, because that's basically what I do. I do crime charts, not so much natal birth charts. Anyway, so I have been doing astrology for over 20 years, but I only recently started to learn the asteroids because they were not part of my training, which was classical astrology, which came from the ancients, not modern astrology. We didn't do asteroids. I didn't really want to learn them because I knew there were thousands of them, and I didn't feel like I would be able to manage that. But I started learning them a few months ago and applying them in crime charts, and I'm so blown away by the results and the accuracy of these bodies in space that now I pretty much rely on them. And I thought it would be interesting, and I talked to Nick about how they come from mythology, the same way the planets did. The planets basically are named after Roman gods and goddesses. Mars, the god of war, represents violence and action in a chart. It can represent gunfire, stabbing, a violent action, a murder. In the same way, Venus, goddess of, Aphrodite, or Venus, goddess of beauty, really in a chart represents what we like, what we want. It's money, it's jewelry, it's possessions, and so on with Jupiter. So they all represent energies. And so as the planets do, so do the asteroids, but more specifically.
Well, there is one thing to note real quick.
Yeah.
They're going back and forth between Roman and Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So with the planets, you've got all Roman gods. And
Mm-hmm.
with these asteroids, there's several different versions in here. And I think that's important because the Roman gods are slightly different from
Mm-hmm.
the Greek gods. And,
Right.
once you get into it more, you can see that.
Yes. I noticed that. I started to take a mythology class a couple of weeks ago. And what I noticed right away was how fluid the meanings of these were. I mean, this happened in this situation, but according to another historian, it really was this way. And there are various variations in the stories of these mythical characters, so that it depends who you kind of got your information from. I know mostly what I was reading was from Hesiod, the Theogony of Hesiod.
Right.
And that was that. It was this way, but it was that way. And of course, over hundreds and hundreds of years of word of mouth, stuff is going to get changed and turned around.
A big part of the mythology is that there is a aspect of poetry, right? And in poetry, you find where these characters can start to fit together. And it's in the lines and how they put them together that they fit into these myths. And really, we lose all that if we don't go back to the original Greek. But you can still find a lot of those stray threads over and over again between the Roman system and the Greek system too.
Yes, it was interesting. It also, when I just started to study it, as I said a few weeks ago, I was right off the bat saw the room for confusion. First of all, they're unfamiliar names. I mean, I had to look up how to pronounce each one of them because I didn't want to be butchering all these names. But secondly, they're fluid characters. Something happened to this one, but didn't happen in another situation. So I thought, wow, whoever becomes expert at this really has something on the ball, because it is very complex, multi-layered storytelling with a lot of twists and turns. But that's also the attraction of it. What draws me, and this is where I made a huge detour in my research. I'm not at that point yet to talk about it, but what drew me was how on earth can a rock in space, be named after a mythical character, and then in a chart be found to reveal the characteristics of a situation or a person that the myth is talking about. And I'll go into that. I have a bunch of examples, but I started to have to know, what was the system of nomenclature? When were they discovered? Who sponsored the discovery? Big hint. So that's a detour, went into that and got to where we're going to go. But anyway, I want to go into some of the specifics of the myths that we have talked about in recent podcasts. We've talked about smiley face killers. We did 4 episodes on that, and I found numerous asteroids in the crime charts of those missing young men that were extremely descriptive of what happened, of the environment they were in when they went missing and ended up murdered. The first one I'm going to talk about is Bacchus. I think Bacchus also would have been Dionysus. If you want to tell us something about Bacchus.
Sure. So Bacchus, god of wine, is most associated with sort of fertility cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also a god that was torn apart and then rose again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we see even in the symbol right there is that cross symbol. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people have suggested that Bacchus was an inspiration for the character of Christ Jesus. And
Mm-hmm.
so similar dates and in the rebirth, similar dates and all this stuff. And he was son of Zeus,
Right.
which is, the top god of the Greek pantheon. So there's a lot of different ideas going on in just that symbol. And I think it's also important to note that John Dee sort of pioneered what we know of as the modern astrological symbols, right? And in his Ars Hieroglyphica, he puts all of them together in a single symbol, and then he tears them apart and says how they fit together.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that Ars Hieroglyphica, you start to understand exactly why they give these symbols to these different astrological signs.
Right. That's a good observation, because I looked at a whole bunch of the glyphs for these asteroids and saw very few with the crucifix, and noticed it in Bacchus. There's 1 or 2 other ones that I saw it in.
Was Bacchus anything that came up when you did do SFK?
Oh, yeah. Actually,
I find that weird, only because now I didn't even think of it. Maybe you said it and I didn't even.
No, I did. I
God of like
had
drink.
2 or 3 charts of the guys, 2 or 3 of the victims at least, which had Bacchus prominently featured in the chart. It was either rising or it was in a stress aspect to other planets. And in the way we interpret Bacchus in astrology is excessive partying, drinking, drugging. We emphasize the party aspect, the god of wine. And all these men were out in bars, or they were at parties. And a number of them were drunk, or it was said that they were intoxicated when they really weren't. But Bacchus was prominent in their charts, and it was matching the situations that each one of them had been in. So I know I talked about Bacchus. The big one that came out in our last, the 4th episode of SFK series, was Apollo. When I did the incorporation chart of Oracle Corporation, and Apollo, which is on the left here, was, I think it's hard to explain. I tried to explain it in layman's terms, because it was so remarkably featured in that chart. It dominated the entire chart, and that I had said it had to be done. The chart had to be planned by AI or a brilliant astrologer to feature it exactly the way it was configured in that chart, because Apollo was the seer, the source of all information that channeled through the Delphic Oracle, and the giver of prophecy, of information to create prophecy through Pythia. And Apollo was also in the mission statement of, I believe, Oracle Corporation, who took information. They were a software giant. They took information from the cloud. They were the most advanced in cloud technology. Took information, funneled it through to be created into software to enable decisions to be made, actions to be made, to disseminate information or to disseminate misinformation. And that's why Apollo was so impressive in that chart. It was, and it fit into the chart of Oracle Corporation. I thought that was deliberately named. There was no random naming. Oracle Corporation for no reason. Anyway, the symbol of Apollo is interesting because it is the inversion of the symbol for the sign Leo, which is ruled by the sun, Leo being the sun god, and the dot goes into the center of the circle when you see the circle of the sun, there's a dot in the middle of that. Right. And this curly thing is Leo upside down, and Apollo being, a leader.
Well, I think what we're seeing there is the lyre, right? So he was the god of music, and you can see sort of that lyre shape right there if you imagine there's a harp in the middle. So I think the inversion is sort of like Leo is like a fist, right? And so Apollo is more like harmonizing that sort of energy. And so I think going back to the astrological signs, the stage, as it were, these are all the elemental aspects. So you've got earth, fire, water, and air. And having these as they move through those different stages are going to give, during the different times of the year, are going to also reflect one of those elemental aspects as they're moving through in relationship to the earth.
Right. It's interesting you say that because the Delphic Oracle would not be active in the winter months. It was only during the warm months. So people didn't go to the Oracle for, I guess it was probably from December through February or something like that. It had to be warm out. So that's interesting. Leo is a fire sign.
Right.
Ruling warmth. So we can go on to, I think I did Bacchus for SFK, and oh yeah, that one would be for Tisiphone, one of the Furies. I think Tisiphone, if you would enlighten me, had listened. Tisiphone was like the nastiest Fury. She was like the most evil one, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm seeing a lot of the Scorpio at the bottom of that. So there is that aspect, but also the Furies were sent out by Hades, who would deploy them based off of injury you might cause to your family. And the Furies are this idea of revenge, right? Maybe not nemesis necessarily, but more like directed revenge. And so I think in this regards, you really kind of get that idea of that Scorpio coming back to bite you. And I'm not necessarily sure which one did what, but I know for a fact that the three Furies, everything the Greeks did were in trinities, right? So they all had these Trinitarian aspects. You have the three Fates, the three Furies, and then the 9 muses were divided up into threes. So each one of these, and even Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades represent like the main trinity of the Olympian gods. So
yeah, this symbol, the Scorpio, is prominent, and the above, just stopping before the curved arrow, that is the glyph for the planet Uranus, which was the Papa Titan of the first, the husband, so to speak, of Gaia. His symbol is there, and then you have Scorpio below. What I got from that is looking at it from an astrological viewpoint. In the crime chart, Tisiphone, or they're calling it Uranus here, is what you just said. It's retaliation and revenge, and in a violent way, in a very spiteful way. And that is how we read it in the crime chart. And as a matter of fact, Tisiphone was very prominent in the chart of the Idaho 4. There was something in those murders that was very vengeful. It was personal. It was resentment. And I think I spoke of that when we did that show months ago. But that was an example of the vengefulness. Also predominant, we talked some weeks ago, did a show on the Black Dahlia. Tisiphone was very prominent in that crime chart. She was murdered by a man who was out of his mind with rage and resentment for her. She had scorned him, and he didn't take it well. And my theory was he was the one who killed her, although it's on paper, it's an unsolved murder, but I think that was what happened to her. And we talked about that in the show. Also, Tisiphone again shows up in some of the smiley face killers, incidents in Ohio where they suspect a gang was involved, either a drug gang or there were some bad drug deals and somebody was very angry and needed to get back at the victim. So those are some examples of Tisiphone prominent in those charts. And okay, if we go to the next one, I think I have Nessus in there. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't have its name, but that's Nessus, has the N, which is helpful. Nessus, I think, wasn't he the centaur who tried to take Deianira across the river and he tried to attack her or something? Nessus was the centaur. I forget whose son he was.
There were a lot of the centaurs that had this sort of idea of like kidnapping human women. And what's funny is the opposite would be Chiron, who Chiron would give knowledge.
Chiron was good, yeah.
Right. And so that sort of distinction there, and how Hercules kind of threw off the balance. You know, in his story with the centaurs, he killed all of them with his, poisoned arrows.
Right.
And it wasn't necessarily intentional, but there was this aspect of the centaurs being so powerful that they couldn't really be overcome by anything other than this poison. And I think Nessus was, one of the prominent features in that as well.
Right. Yeah. When we see Nessus in a crime chart, specifically, if we end up looking at, unfortunately, a lot of missing children.
It was a poisoned arrow.
Yeah. We look at a lot. What happens lately is more and more often, unfortunately, missing children or abducted children or child murders. And in those charts, Nessus shows up, and it's predominantly featured against other planets and in a negative way. And one such example would be John Benet Ramsey. And I put her chart in here. You could flip over to hers, because then I also want to explain how these things look. We could bring those back after John Benet will be the last one in there.
Oh, I'm wondering if that's the first thing.
Oh, no, that's the second one. That's the second one.
Oh, then
you don't have the one of John Benet? Uh-oh.
I'll have to, I could probably.
That's okay. I'll just talk about it then.
I'll bring it up.
Yeah, it should be in the first folder. But John Benet, what it tells me in her chart, there's all this controversy. Was she molested or not? She absolutely was. I don't know. I know why they're covering it up, but it's predominantly featured that there is some sort of molestation in her chart. And I've seen it in the charts of abducted children as well, which is a shame. But that's what Nessus. In astrology, we start to boil things down. We don't look at the whole myth, obviously, but things that stand out, people work with them. And empirically, we develop definitions of the different asteroids. And then they turn up in the chart of a person when something like that happens. There's another one. Oh, that also. No, that's the next one. Okay. We did Bacchus and Apollo.
Now,
then go ahead.
There's an aspect of numerology to all of these. So they've counted each and every one of these asteroids, and based off of their position, I think that has a lot to do with how they've named them. So there's an aspect of numerology to all of the Greek gods and all these Greek figures. And I think what they're doing is they're matching them up. Now, the Greek mythology itself was sort of like this poetic conversation with nature. And in using the numerology between the two, I think that's where you get that linkage that you were talking about, is like they're naming these things based off of, intrinsic aspects to them. Yeah, there's the chart.
There it is. I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to do a slide. I thought, well, I'm getting too many slides in here. I didn't do it. But I did notice really interesting numbers coming up. I did a whole, I must have just pulled 25 examples of the dates of discovery. I don't know if that's when they were discovered, the dates they were named, and the dates they were made official. I got a batch of 11s and 13s and 17s in those dates. And I'm going to talk about one very important one in a little while. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. All this 13, 17, and 11. And but not enough of a sample to really say that that's what's going on. It may be, it may not be, but I did notice it. But I didn't want to veer off in that direction. I wanted to stay on, looking back into the nomenclature of these asteroids. So the reason I have this chart, this is a chart of the prime chart of John Benet Ramsey, which actually we're going to be doing a show on in the future.
Yes.
So it's kind of timely that this came up. I just picked it as a good example because I'm talking about Nessus, and it does refer to sexual assault.
Oh, you know what I
And,
wanted to ask real quick? It
Go ahead.
was that Nessus? Did that one show up at all in the Smiley Face Killers too, or no?
I think it did in one of them. I think it
Okay,
did.
I'm just wondering because that would be wild if you had like a drink.
Well, there was a sexual agenda going on with that too, as well. Yeah. And I probably didn't mention it. If it only comes up once, maybe I don't. But yeah. I did. I would have to go back over my notes and pull that. But it's in this one. What is also in this one is the asteroid Tantalus. And you can imagine the word tantalize comes right from that. Tantalus, I don't have much information on, but what we interpret it as in the astrological chart is something that is presented that you really want. You feel like you can't have it. It's like a temptation, but it drives you and you have to have it. And Tantalus was in Smiley Face in several of the charts because there was a sexual element to some of them. So Tantalus comes up here in John Benet Ramsey's chart. And she was very desirable to certain types of people that would want to pursue her, which ultimately led to her unfortunate death. So Tantalus is there with Nessus. I saw the two of them together. I was like, oh my God, there's no denying what happened to this poor girl. But the other reason I wanted to put this chart up like this was going around the outside. You see the chart around the outer circle, you can't read it. It's very small print. But these are all names of all the asteroids. Not all of them. I shouldn't say that. The ones that the software will pull. They're not all active. In order to be relevant to the chart, they have to contact another planet. They have to be configured in some way to an angle, which would be one of the specific houses. These are all in this chart. The asteroids are in every single chart because they're out there. Right. Everything's out there. But all of these do not fit into John Benet's chart, only a few of them. But this is what you see. And this is the
Well, a quick note about the asteroids real quick. Mm-hmm. There are multiple asteroid belts in our solar system. And so these are sometimes in the outer ring or in the inner ring, because I think there's one between Earth and Mars. And then there's another one between Mars and Jupiter.
Mars and Jupiter, right.
So you've got these big, these are barriers to our universe. So these really do have like an impact if you think about our consciousness being part of the whole. So
yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, there's the Sybil belt, there's the Apollo belt, there's a bunch of belts. And what fits in, I think Tantalus belongs to Apollo. One of the other ones does as well. Bacchus, I think, does. So those are the names. And on the right-hand side is, I think there's about 100 listed there that the software will pull and tell you where it's configured in the chart. And it looks like a nightmare. It really isn't. You look quickly at where the planets are and check where they configure on the right. Those are 100. We actually have 8,000. There are actually 1.2 million. There are 8,000 that are named and identifiable to be worked with, which is why I kind of didn't want to start working with them in the beginning. It was like overwhelming. But I think the outside rim here are either 50 or 100. I will look at those. I will look at the ones on the right because as bad as it looks, you learn to there's 10 planets. You look through them for the 10. Do they configure with the 10 in any way and how? And it really isn't that bad. If you want to look up something that doesn't fall in here, like I was trying to find Ganymede because Ganymede is very significant in certain incidents of crime.
Well, Ganymede is a moon of Jupiter.
Yes. Ganymede being symbolic of a kidnapped child, right, or often of a young boy who was molested because of Zeus taking Ganymede off and bringing him in as his houseboy. Then he becomes the water bearer.
It was Zeus's father that did that. That was Kronos that kidnapped Ganymede.
Okay.
Right? And so, yeah, it was Zeus that ended up using that against him.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I had it a little bit backwards, but
Right.
he was brought in as a houseboy, and he became Aquarius, the water bearer, because he was carrying water for the household. So he becomes Aquarius.
Right.
But Ganymede, in that sense of that myth, what happened to him, it shows a kidnapping. And I ran a crime chart recently for the very famous case of Johnny Gosch, who went missing in Iowa in the early 1980s. And that kind of set out the whole expose of the Franklin scandal. That got connected to the Franklin scandal, was later written about extensively. Nick
Big
Bryant and
Ganymede
another guy.
energy.
Yeah, it was big Ganymede. So Ganymede comes out in Johnny Goss's chart, which I looked up because that was in my mind. I thought I've got to look that up. That's one of the first instances of boys being kidnapped into these rings by perverts, and we didn't know that was going on back in the 80s. So that was very significant.
This makes me very curious about Epstein's chart.
I'll run it. Yeah, I'll definitely run that. Somebody else asked me that, and I didn't do it yet. So that'll light a fire under me for sure. So that one, Ganymede, I didn't go into too much, but I did talk about John Bonet. And here's a really interesting one. Oh no, before I get to that, of the three fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. Atropos turns up in these cases as well. It's also in John Benet Ramsey's chart. John Benet had, like I said, some really strong indicators of malfeasance, and also in the Black Dahlia. Atropos being the one who cuts the cord of life. The three fates. One spins the life. The second one measures it. The third one cuts it off.
Right.
And that's what Atropos does for the Black Dahlia and John Benet Ramsey. And so that was they're very clear and concise. I mean, when you look at planets are so general. You really have to funnel down what you're looking for. You have to look at the sign it's in and the house, and is it configured to other planets?
It seems like when these asteroids pop up, it's just like a 1-to-1 ratio. Like you get the exact thing once you know anything about their story, which is like, that's crazy accurate.
That's how I felt, why I fell in love with them. I didn't realize how useful they were in crime charts. They're so specific. Whereas if you're looking at Mars, like I said, it's violence, it's sexual desire, it's an accident, it's a gunshot, it's an explosion. It could be all these things. But you have something like Atropos or Atropos, that's the end of life. That's a death.
Right.
You know, you're not going to look at what kind of death. You're going to find that somewhere else. But you know that this person's cord was cut, which is what this.
Well, it's also a very interesting part of the story. It's their death that's the center of it. There are other aspects to different other stories, but in the Jean Benet Ramsey case, the death mystery, right, is the central focus. Black Dahlia, wasn't she cut up or something?
Yeah,
and it was like
was.
A death of like basically a flower, you know? So it's like death is the central character in all of their crime stories.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly how I described it.
Would you say, BD, the asteroids act like a fine-tuning dial? In that you have these planets kind of telling you what's going on in the general vicinity, kind of like you're triangulating. And then when you have the asteroids come in, they kind of focus it down, like fine tune exactly what you're looking for. It almost sounds like that to me. That's why I ask.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Lisa. And I love that you said fine tuning like a dial, because that's the shape. The zodiac chart is the shape of a dial. So, I mean, you just nailed it right there. Yes.
Like a
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, great job. I mean, perfect. It is a dial. So, okay, here's where I start to make that detour. I come across the asteroid Phaethon, son of Helios. If you want to tell us a little bit about Phaethon.
Well, I know Helios, obviously Helios the sun, right? And so I'm not so familiar with this sun. I'm going to look it up real quick. Yeah, there's this concept of Helios, right? I know where he comes from, right? He comes from Thea and Hyperion, right? And Thea is the goddess of value. So she's sort of depicted as like laser-eyed, right? So she's got lights coming from her eyes. She actually creates intrinsic value. And so from that concept of value, that's where we get the sun, the moon, and dawn, which would be Eos, Helios, and Selene, right? And so to measure that down even further, like the dial, I'm sure Helios's sun would take all of those concepts and sort of bring them into his own aspects. That's why we use Greek for psychology words, is because it just sort of all these different stories nail down into a psychological concept.
Yeah. What I got out of Phaethon, which really intrigued me, it was just so amazing. Discovered in 1983, the first asteroid to be discovered by spacecraft and not through a telescope. And the story I got in looking it up was that Phaethon wanted to ride a chariot. So took off on a chariot with horses, racing all over the place, causing mayhem, lost control of the chariot. And Zeus had to strike him with a lightning bolt to get him to stop because he was destroying everything and running over people and stuff like that. So what we extract from that in astrology is that it is about someone who takes on responsibility that they can't handle and they mess it up. Right. And they also are reckless in their approach. They take on, get on a chariot and ride it too fast and destroy things. So I start to look at that, and I know that you can extract things down into modern terms. So I'm thinking, well, a chariot, okay, well, that could be a car. It could be a car accident. It could be somebody driving a car too fast. So I got this idea. I got to look up race car drivers. So I looked up the charts of two famous race car drivers. One's Jackie Stewart. He's a British race car driver, Formula One, very famous. The other one was Kyle Petty, good old Southern boy, NASCAR race car driver. And I looked at their natal charts, and wouldn't you know that Phaethon is extremely strong in both of their charts. Race cars, they drive fast cars. Sometimes that gets reckless. So I thought, well, there's Phaethon. That's right there, literally. And then in connection with crime, a while ago, I did a write-up on the murder of Diane Downs, who was a young mother who attempted to murder her 3 children in May of 1983. This was in Oregon. She had 3 young children. She was a single mother, and she had a boyfriend who didn't want children. So she decided that the boyfriend was more important to her than her own 3 children, who were all below the age of 10, I believe. And she went driving around with them in the countryside one night, riding around, trying to figure out what to do. So she finally decided she had to choose the boyfriend over the kids. She pulled the car over and shot her 3 children in the car. 2 of them died. One was permanently disabled, is now confined to a wheelchair, one of the daughters. Now, Diane Downs is now serving a life term in prison. She'll never get out. But Phaethon was featured in relation to Mars, which was gunshots. She shot her children in her car, a vehicle, wow. The chariot, a vehicle.
I'll bet there's an Icarus asteroid too.
Oh, absolutely. The Icarus, yeah.
And if you got them two together, you could actually predict what time would be the worst time for you to be in a car because somebody's careless driving.
Yes, that's a good observation. Because I did see an Icarus. You know where I saw Icarus was in the first plane striking the North Tower of World Trade Center.
Wow.
Icarus. Yep. Flying too high, and it's literally an airplane. Oh, Icarus was wings and wax, but it's an air projectile striking the World Trade Center. Icarus is in that. I looked at the chart of World Trade as well, and I found Icarus in there. So these are really, you can see how completely critical they are to unraveling a crime chart, especially when you don't have a lot of forensic information. You don't have a lot of evidentiary information. I mean, we cannot use any of this as evidence, but it's still information that tells us a story. And the story always brings us back to the original myth. So that's where go ahead.
Something I just want to add real quick, BD, before I lose the thought. And this is kind of out of nowhere, but you were reminding me of it because you mentioned the chariot scene. And like these meteors, like you mentioned before, they do have like kind of like iron, right? They can be made up of iron.
Metals, rocks, or blocks of ice. And I don't know what metals. I couldn't find any more about that, but I was surprised to see that. But that's what I saw when I looked it up.
Well, that's
I
what Musk
Mostly
did,
rocks.
right? Doesn't he want to get out there and start mining these asteroids?
Yes, he does.
That's next.
yeah, because like one of the yeah, like me and Lisa have been like working on like this blood. We're trying to work on a blood series, a series on
Mhm.
kind of like looking into blood and the occult aspect. And once I started running a lot of names that are actually in blood, I started hitting like a lot of gods and chariots and cars. And I have been saying that I do think that it is quite possibility that like stories that were being told by gods, they're 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 fighting or there are things that they're doing. I actually do think it may even go down to actual like changes like within your
Mhm.
blood, your eyes,
Mhm.
whole body. Like you're actually they're making some like war, but it's things just binding or killing each other as you start taking form. And I do think that like this is another way to explain it. Like I think in the Matrix, when there is those twins, they are on the chariot on the in the tarot card. There's twins on the chariot. I think in the Matrix they're representing that. Now, in the Matrix, those dudes were albinos. And now just like blood, you're only gonna have red or white or red and pink. I mean,
Mhm.
white and red and white. And pink. And I think the car chase is actually showing them flowing down through the veins and everything going around.
Mhm.
And you start throwing metals in there and stuff. I start thinking about like the electricity, which is why somebody had to send a lightning bolt. You said before.
Mhm.
I'm saying you start sending electricity now into the fucking veins, and now you really start getting everything going. Everything start binding and doing what it's supposed to do. I just don't know. That sounds crazy, but
No, and I'm thinking there's iron in the blood, and you mentioned that kind of an interaction. Somebody that causing maybe an obstruction or as a conduit for something. There's all kinds of
Definitely a
elements in the
conduit.
blood. Yeah, there's all kinds of elements in the blood. I think it's fascinating because if you think the blood now if you connect the blood to the eyes and what happens as a result of that and the transactions from
I,
that and the results, that now you really got something going. I mean,
like
the
I
eyes
don't
alone are remarkable, but when you put the blood there,
like
and
I
then
don't
it goes
know.
through the whole body, you know.
Like when you see stuff on TV, like them showing you how stuff moves around in blood. Like I really don't know if it looks like that, but like I could see like even in the Matrix when these people are jumping from car to car, it's like they're actually like going from thing to thing within the blood,
Yeah.
attached. And like it's very weird if you look at it that way. And I don't know. Maybe I'm just losing it. With
No, I think you're finding it.
No, I
I
think
think
you're
you're
right because
finding it.
there's a lot of elements in blood, especially with
Mhm.
electrolytes. You have
Mhm.
magnesium, you have copper, you have iron, you have all kinds of different stuff in order to deliver. It's a mode of transport, and then as well as a mode of transport in and out of organs. It not only takes stuff to organs, predominantly oxygen, but other things, but it also ships out stuff. So
Take stuff out
Chariot
of there.
card. Are you talking about the twins in the front of the chariot?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. There they are.
Yep.
That's cool. That's cool.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and like even the funny thing is like even in that movie they even specify that they're using these because they do what they're told more often. The other ones can decide to do something else. And like if you think about it, that would be when the heart's pumping the blood the other way, maybe. It's not going the way it was supposed to go. So we
You
have
know,
to use these guys because they'll go that way.
it's interesting though. When I think of the flow of blood, I think of almost like in a drone looking down at a freeway, and everything's and then some things stop and they turn off, and then other ones keep going, and some are going slower, and some are going faster. Or it's maybe an overhead of something like Grand Central Station, where these bodies are moving, but they all have a specific direction that they're going in. They all have a specific purpose for being there. That's how I've always thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Go back to
thinking about how things happen, I started thinking, I never thought of this in relation to the planets of astrology, maybe because they go back so many millennia and they've been operative for so many millennia. I never thought of this, but I thought of it with, say say I'm a scientist and I find an asteroid. I identify an asteroid through a telescope. It's a chunk of rock in orbit, 50 million miles away. And I identify it and I name it. And then through statistics or what have you, it can now be located in an astrology horoscope because it has a direction, a location, and an identity.
Well,
and
there could be an aspect of numerology in that they're taking the numerological numbers from these names, because each Greek letter has its own number, and then you apply that to the date or time that it was found. And in a way, you could actually get a really strong correspondence there.
Yeah, that would have been a good project to do it. Like I said, I was doing dates. I did not do any gematria with any of this, but it would be really interesting to see that borne out, because I collected a number of dates. Like I said, there's a ton of 11s and 13s and 17s in there. But anyway, I started thinking, how does that work? Is that magic? Is that electromagnetism? Is that the result of photons flowing through the universe and connecting us all to source? And so that, Ceres, the first asteroid discovered, has a specific meaning in my chart, and it's very accurate. This is the next thing I'm going to talk about. Ceres was the first asteroid that was discovered, and I thought, I have to go back to the beginning and just sort this out. I've got to figure out, how did they name these, and what. I was trying to figure out something I don't think can be answered, but it got me on the path of where I'm going to still go with this. I promise I'll get there. But I thought the first asteroid was Ceres. And Ceres is, of course, Demeter, or Ceres, the goddess of agriculture and fertility, crops, farming. So Ceres in a person's chart is where you are, what you are cultivating and what you are producing. And I haven't seen it in crime charts specifically, but in natal charts, and I'll just discuss my own because I happen to know it. In my chart, Ceres talks about my collection and learning of philosophy and advanced knowledge for the purpose of sharing it in a public platform, which is podcasting. That's what my Ceres is telling me I should be doing. So we know that works. And Ceres is actually one of 4 major planets that most astrologers now look at. I mean, asteroids, sorry, that most astrologers look at. They look at Ceres, Pallas, Vesta, and Juno. Right. However, those are the 3, the heavy hitters. So anyway, I'll get to Ceres. The first asteroid discovered. This is real interesting. It's the key to a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on with Ceres discovery, which I found fascinating. Ceres is discovered January 1st, 1801, 1/1/1801. Discovered by an Italian astronomer and scientist named Giuseppe Piazzi. He was also a Catholic priest. So he named the asteroid Ceres, the asteroid after Ceres, because he was from Sicily. He was naming it in honor of his home country, which is basically an agrarian culture. Right. It's farming. So good.
There is an aspect. So this is the largest object in the asteroid belt. So for him to find this first, I think that means that this is the primary, like you were saying, this is the growing one, because it is the largest. So there's an aspect to that. Now, the second one you mentioned, Pallas Athena, that's the second largest. So it just moves on down the line. And so there is an explanation for a lot of this stuff based off of the sizes and how they relate to one another.
Right. Right. And that's why I think astrologers look at those 4. I like to look at other ones as well, but they look at those 4 for various things. Now, another interesting thing is Pallas, inspiration. Okay. Pallas Athene, inspiration, higher learning. Mine is in relation to publishing. So I write and I publish what I write, usually, most of the time, not all the time. And so that's my Pallas. And when it is activated, as it recently has been by Jupiter, I went and revised one of my books, which was interesting to note. So, I'm just giving examples of how these work.
Athena is also the goddess of like responsibility and duty, right? So it feels like that's a duty that you have to do, especially in conjunction with like a Jupiterian energy, like a Zeus energy.
Absolutely. And I felt like I had to do it because I found the book had mistakes in it. And that to me was like intolerable. So I had to go and redo it. But anyway, with Ceres, so Giuseppe Piazzi discovers Ceres. And this is real interesting. The Vatican took note of this. I don't think Giuseppe Piazzi was your garden variety Catholic priest. I think he was connected because the Vatican took note of this and said, oh, Giuseppe, we're going to build an observatory for you. And so they built an observatory in Palermo, Sicily, for the purpose of observing the heavens. And that was, I think that came around the 1820s, 1830s. So
it's a perfect example of covert Hellenism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So these people are practicing Hellenism in secret, and then they're naming the stars.
Yeah.
That's kind of incredible.
It gets better. I'll tell you, it gets better. So we go on and they start to discover more asteroids in the 1800s. And the tradition was to name them after Greek mythological characters. Oh, there's your Phaethon. I think they spelled it wrong. It's without a TH at the end. But that's interesting because you got a Pluto on the top and an upside down Venus on the bottom.
Yep.
And you
that almost looks like a chariot too.
It does look like a chariot, does it? There's a wheel on there too. What do you know?
2 wheels. There you go. Top and bottom.
So that was quite descriptive. And Tantalus, it kind of looks like a trophy to me. I don't know what they were trying to do with that one. That's actually Neptune on a box is what that looks like to me. The trident of Neptune on a box. Not very inventive looking, but some of them are not.
Well, Neptune says a lot though, right?
Neptune says a lot. Oh yeah. I mean, the fantasy element of being tantalized by somebody, something you can't have, you're going to fantasize about it. It's going to become unreal and it's going to become obsessional.
Right.
So that's
and the box is interesting too, because the box is representative of salt when you're talking about in alchemy. Right. And so this is like the physical world, the physical fantasy. So it's like something very real while also at the same time being something you're thinking about a lot, kind of like an obsession.
Yeah. It's almost like you have it physically, it exists, but then it goes up into the realm of mental and emotional fantasy. It goes like a TV antenna up there and goes out that way. And you start to emit unrealistic energies around it. But
this is really like I think I mentioned this before, and I'm glad you just said this about the salt and like the whole, even this word tantalizing or whatever. When I was in the OTO, when I went through one of the initiations, I've mentioned this before. That like they end up like dipping like bread into oil into salt. Now I think there's tons of different fucking things going on in these initiations, and one of them I do think you're actually going through the eyeball as well, but plus other things. But like I have always said that I think, in my opinion, you should say you want to go in a different direction if you're asked, what are you doing here? But I think if you follow where they keep bringing you, you're actually going away from where you're supposed to go and you're getting grounded. And I think like it's interesting how like after you take that oil, that bread and that salt, the next thing you will be doing is like eating a bunch of like kind of like figs and like food. It's just like interesting how like that is a sensory thing. That's something you can fall in love with. That's very tantalizing. I do think that you go now sitting down, reading and eating is actually showing you like kind of getting grounded to the pleasures of this reality. Because like you even read, like somebody putting a movie on in your head, you're going to start picturing somebody else's stuff. That's a source of entertainment before we had movies. We made dreams out of other people's words. That's serious shit.
To
Yeah. Absolutely.
your point of salt, away from coastal areas, salt is rare. As a matter of fact, many people are, and many livestock animals are deficient in salt. And that's why they put salt licks out, because in nature, there isn't a whole lot of salt outside of marine coastal areas. So it's interesting. You talk about the salt and this obsession and this grounding of it, that you need it in your body in order to maintain proper metabolic functions. So especially with the electrolytes and so forth. But I was going to mention one more thing. You were talking about Ceres. I know it's not the same spelling, but if you think about Siri as Siri, it's backwards to Iris. And iris, which is in your eye, is responsible for opening and closing the pupil, which is dictated by light. And so when you talk about agriculture, and agriculture is highly dependent upon the sun, you get this analogous association with the iris itself, because it also responds and requires the sun to move back and forth.
This is like
Just
deep
wanted to kind of
biological
throw that in.
alchemy. You know?
I think so. I think so. I
Absolutely.
think so.
Love this stuff.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. All right.
So anyway, I think where I was going with our friends at the Vatican, so they end up making this observatory, and then I was saying that they took the tradition of naming the asteroids after mythological characters. Some of the scientists started to just take women's names, and then as it evolved, some of them were also just taking regular names, but mostly the ones that came into prominence were Greek or Roman named. And this continued up until the present time. But in the mid 1800s, the Vatican really got off on what they did for Piazzi, and they ended up building another observatory on the roof of the Church of St. Ignatius of Loyola in Rome. And so they have two observatories going that we know of by 1852. And so there you get the feeling they're very caught up and interested in this whole process of locating and identifying asteroids. So we go through that period, and there started to be hundreds as optics got better and telescopes got better. We got more and more discoveries of asteroids. And of course, the Vatican is behind the scenes, and I'll tell you just how much in a little while, because they were all in on this exploration. So we can move forward to 1999, where on September 11th of 1999, an asteroid is discovered about 58 million miles from here. It orbits the sun. Okay. It's very small. It's only like a third of a mile in diameter, which is like a rock floating in space. But they took a great interest in it, and they named it Bennu, which is the name of the Egyptian bird of Osiris. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Now, I'll just stay on that for a minute, because that to me almost looks like it has an engraving. It almost looks like an engraved medallion. That's a photographic image of Bennu, which is a tiny rock orbiting the sun. And if you want to go to the next Bennus, I put in a couple of things in regard to it.
It almost looks like a three-eyed face.
Yes, it looked weird. I thought it looked like it was engraved or something. Anyway, that's Bennu the bird. That is the surface of Bennu, the asteroid. Looks like somebody's backyard in New Mexico or something, but it's that's what it looks like. It's just rock, but they found that it has a very high concentration. Well, I won't say high. Almost 5% of the matter is organic. It's carbonate based, and which is a lot. And there's water, evidence of water having been there, and now they postulate that may have been the first locus of human life in the universe, or of some form of life in the universe, going back over 10 million years.
Do you get the significance? So this is the body of Osiris.
Yeah.
Right?
And it
Osiris
orbits,
is chopped up into pieces.
Yeah, and it orbits the sun, which was the sun god, Ra.
Right.
And Bennu is the bird of Ra. And this was kind of funky to me. I was under the impression that the scientific community was naming the asteroids, and they were. It's actually the Minor Planet Center at the Smithsonian Observatory. As of the 20th century, was in charge of naming all the asteroids. But they found this one, and they offered a contest, name that asteroid. The University of Arizona sponsored this contest, name that asteroid. I don't know if I buy this, but a third grader gave it the name of Bennu, because he knew it was the name of of Ra's pet bird. Third grader, really?
Give me a break. They're saying third degree. They're saying it's a third degree Mason And that he
I know.
named it Venu because of his studies about Osiris or something.
Osiris, exactly.
Venu because of his studies about Osiris or something.
Osiris, exactly. So
Yeah.
they attributed to this poor 8-year-old kid, which is ridiculous.
8
Nick,
years old.
8 years old. Oh, God,
yeah, third grader.
wait.
Nick, if you want to show the
8 and 3.
yeah, there you go. There you go. If you want to show the next ones,
Oh,
I want to explain. There's Bennu's sign. Looks like a bird, doesn't it? Kind of looks like a bird
It
with
does.
wings
It
and a
does.
beak,
It does.
and that's kind of a cute one.
You
I
kind
don't
of
know
have
if I
the
see-
Aquarius thing going on too.
Yes, absolutely. That's cool.
And it's a water
kind of
bird.
it's a water bird. It's like a Mercury had his antenna knocked off, or Venus had some of her parts rearranged, but it's definitely a bird shape. There was another one. I didn't put it up because it looked like a coat hanger, and I thought that looks ridiculous. I'm not putting that up. I want to put one up that looks like a bird. So if you could go on to the bird ones, representation of the Egyptian bird, so that we could see.
That's Venus with bedhead.
Yeah.
Well, if you put it up, it
That was
kinda
after
makes
a
it
night with
hum.
Marcus.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
There we go. Now the one on the left is the spacecraft. It looks like a bird. It has two long legs that come out, and when those wings are at a certain angle, it looks like the wings of a bird flapping. Of course, that's
They're
the
just
beak.
messing with us.
They're
That's
messing
totally a
with
bird.
us.
Oh, shit.
That's totally a bird. And okay, so we get to Bennu. Now they have this fascination with Bennu, and they have to send a spacecraft to Bennu because they have to prove that it's the oldest material in the solar system, if not the universe. They've got this thing about the origin, which I will get to. So they build a spacecraft around the 2016, and they name it Osiris Rex. Rex meaning king, of course.
Yes.
But I'll tell you what Osiris stands for, which they drew up. Origins, spectral interpretation, resource identification, security, regolith, explorer. That's how they get Osiris. Just call it Osiris Rex. Stop messing around with anagrams. It's Osiris the king. We all know it. So they built the spacecraft that they wanted to send to Bennu and sift through the organic material, bring it back to Earth, which they did. But NASA, if you can believe it, had a bit of a funding problem. So in swoops the Vatican, and the Vatican funds the launch of Osiris Rex to planetoid Bennu. I mean, are we that stupid, people? I mean, really? So they send it to Bennu, and they bring back this carbonate material. It took about 6 or 7 years for it to come back. And they did find that it was as old, and it did seem capable of supporting life. What's interesting is that the Vatican, in the meantime, ends up collecting over 1,200 rock specimens from space probes. So now I want to bust the Vatican a little bit because they've been very coy about their involvement in these things. I'm going to read to you some excerpts from articles, and then we're going to take it from there. I'm going to read it. I'm going to try my best not to be snarky, but I want to read it to you. Little known to the world, the Vatican has had an observatory staffed by Jesuit astronomers since the 1930s. I have to interject here. No, folks, you take it back another maybe 500 years. But anyway.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
it's a lot longer than that. It's a lot longer than
I
that.
said I wasn't going to be snarky.
Well,
But
it's
I
like
did.
No, but it's good. It's good.
But, so now I really have to avoid being snarky here, but let's go. Devout Catholic men who have taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience live together while studying the cosmos. The legacy extends even further back in history. In the mid-1800s, priest Angelo Secchi built an observatory on the roof of the Church of St. Ignatius of Loyola in Rome. The church conducted astronomical research to show the compatibility of Catholicism and science, the Jesuits say. Compatibility, which 500 years ago they were murdering people because they were trying to impress how incompatible science and religion were. That was the Inquisition. They were burning people at the stake. Now they're doing a complete 180, and they want to unify the two, which is really kind of scary because it's run by a bunch of Jesuits. All right. So
people got killed depending on what they believed was going on out in the stars.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, they do.
Like you literally got
they're constructing a narrative.
Yeah.
They're constructing a narrative. They're just starting to build it. So
This whole
Osiris
scenario
Rex,
kind of reminded me of the Hermit card, right? So you've got this creature sort of hiding away with this star inside of the lantern. And so you've got the Vatican, which is being very secretive about this sort of thing, sort of hiding the stars away from people. That's sort of what they've always been doing.
and they have, and yet they outed themselves. And I found where they outed themselves. I'm going to get to that. Anyway, what are you going to say, Lisa?
Just most of the handwritten journals of Galileo, Kepler, some of these real big name astronomers are all stored in the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
They own them basically.
We're all alchemists.
Well, they were
all alchemists. Yeah.
They absolutely were. They absolutely were. So there's another article that I dug out. I'm going to explain where I got that from because it's very funny. Okay, this one says NASA also has past experience collaborating with the epicenter of the Roman Catholic faith. Epicenter, do you think earthquake when you hear epicenter? The epicenter of the Roman Catholic faith, since declaring in 1984 that an inquisition wrongfully condemned astronomer Galileo Galilei of heresy in 1633, the Vatican has worked to smooth over the friction between science and religion. Friction that they created themselves 500 years ago, that they're now walking it back and trying to merge religion with science. And that's why Bennu is so damn important. They want to rewrite creation theory. They want to preempt the cosmos and build their own agenda around it. And in so doing, to write a destruction theory, the end of the world. Because the very next asteroid they're going to probe through space is Apophis, which is the Egyptian god of chaos. Get it? Do we get it yet? This stuff is nuts.
Well, something I wanted to just, add real quick. You were saying that they kind of like want to give us this, this storyline, but from basically what I've got out of from like researching people that I just never covered or will cover eventually, if you really start to like really look at the basis of our idea of what we're on, where we are, and what's around us, that has all been handed to us from people who were, and not even hiding it, and probably some very obsessive with it. They were all alchemists and occultists. Every one of them were. And we have to wonder, like, we're going to take what we think they're saying on face value of what's out there and what's going on. You have to really, keep that in mind, that alchemists and occultists and whatever, people like that, is how we understand what's out in the skies.
And it's not just this asteroid or Osiris-Rex that the Vatican is funding. I'm sure maybe you'll cover this, but they have a lot of money into some of these major telescopes around the world.
Oh yeah. Yes.
So a lot of funding goes into astrological science.
Yes, and a number of the staffs, they are staffed with Jesuit scientists, Jesuit whatever, missionaries, priests, scholars, and they are now beginning to name a fair amount of the asteroids after prominent Jesuits. That's 6 in the past year alone. Here's another thing I pulled out, which I wanted to state, and this is what busts open the Vatican's whole coy game of, well, we just got into this because of Piazzi. We just started doing this in 1850. Blah, blah, blah. Vatican Observatory is one of the oldest active astronomical observatories in the world, with its roots going back to 1582 and the Gregorian reform of the calendar. They just busted themselves. They just outed themselves, because what was going on in 1582? Years to follow, they convicted Galileo Galilei, but he was well connected. He was under house arrest. He never went to prison. He wasn't executed. Other people had much worse fates. They were persecuting in the 1500s all these scientists who did not follow the prescribed religious dogma, and a lot of them suffered terrible torture and death. Yet, what they're telling us now is back when they were busting these people and persecuting them, they were already following astronomical theory. They were realizing that they were wrong. They were looking into it while it was like one doing the opposite hand, what they were doing. They were researching astronomical theory, disproving all the religious dogma, but at the same time persecuting people out in public for going against it, because they said 1582, that was when a lot of this stuff was going on against Giordano Bruno and all those guys that got burned at the stake.
Yeah,
So
I have a little insight about that.
Mhm.
So if you look at what they're doing now to Gulbekki Tepe, they're trying to cover it up and they're trying to make sure that nobody gets in there. Gulbekki
Mhm.
Tepe was one of these societies that was obsessed with the stars.
Mhm.
So, the same idea of, well, we can't let other people in on this secret that we've got.
Right.
We're going to keep all of this knowledge for ourselves.
It's always been the case. That's why occult got the bad name it got, because they
Yeah.
wanted the people to think it was bad, and they kept doing it. They kept doing astrology in private and alchemy and magic and all their practices. But to the public, they didn't want us to have any wind of an idea that that stuff was effective, that that stuff was relevant to life. So they're always playing both hands. They're always playing the opposite in private and in public. And this is just another example.
One of the things that you were talking about, 1580s, 1590s, 1570s, this is when the scientific revolution began.
Mhm.
This is when we went from just kind of doing experiments or assuming certain things and actually applying a scientific inquiry to the actual process. So science was about to be catapulted into a new era when all of this started to come down. And then to Galileo, we covered Della Porta, and he was very good friends with Galileo. And Della Porta is heavily into cryptography and then the ciphers and all that other stuff. I mean, you're having all these merging of great minds in this one area of the late 1500s.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very important time. And then for the Vatican to step in, it almost seems, on purpose. I think they knew.
Well, it was the shift. There was the paradigm shift that they wanted to prevent. They wanted to keep garnering the power that they were building up since first century. So it makes perfect sense that they were doing that.
There's another little insight. So one of the ways that the ancient philosophers would see the world is in a symbolic way, right?
Mhm.
They had a symbolic understanding of the world around them. Well, we've lost that almost completely, but having a symbolic understanding of the world around you means a highly connected mind, because you have to connect these dots between the symbols you see in nature and what you're experiencing inside. So once you've lost that symbolic understanding of the universe through, certain religious beliefs, then other people can use that symbology against you because they still have the memory of it and how it works. All the rest of us, we're just sort of like outside of that whole understanding,
Yeah. Yep. So what I come across finally, I guess, to put the coda on this whole discussion is Vatican has a website that I came across. And that's why I have this hat. I actually sprung for this VaticanObservatory.org. Bought a hat from them.
Do you know the name of their telescope?
Lucifer. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Beatty, it's called Lucifer. Their telescope is called Lucifer.
I know.
It's in Arizona.
Oh, I believe it. It's in Tucson. It's in Tucson, my favorite.
But isn't like, if you think about a device that is like its whole thing is to manipulate light, like could you actually really pick anything better than that anyway?
That's just it. So Lucifer in Roman mythology, he's called Eosphorus, right? And Eosphorus is the son of the dawn, Eos. So there's a highly symbolic nature to that too. This is like the first breaking of light, and they wanted to really symbolize that with this name Lucifer.
Yep. Yeah, they don't miss. They don't miss. So anyway, I just wanted to tell people about the VaticanObservatory.org is a very interesting website. What galled me was that they charge for a membership. I mean, and they got all this money. They charge for membership. I thought, well, maybe I'll take one for the team and I'll put up $5 a month because I just really want to see what's going on. I want to see what they're talking about. I did buy the hat. Okay. I didn't sign up for the membership. But what was freaky was when I went into the website just to enter my name to get their newsletter. I enter my name and some information, and boom, my picture pops up on my page. They pulled my photograph off the internet, put it on my member page. I was like, whoa, that's a little scary. They pulled a picture of me. And so I'm looking at, putting my email and there's a picture of me in there. I'm like, ooh, that's a little scary. Anyway, I started to peruse the articles there, which were quite interesting. They have a whole page saying, we are dedicated to the exploration of sacred space. Now space, the universe is theirs. It's sacred. They're going to turn science and religion back together after splitting them apart. But what was funny was they had the store where you can buy tote bags and mugs and T-shirts and sweatshirts, and you can make a donation to the Vatican. And the thing that was my favorite was one of the articles written by somebody who seemed fairly scholarly. I read a number of his articles in the website, but this one article got me. Was, should we consider baptizing extraterrestrials? Now, I looked at my friend Ziggy Stardust and I thought, would you want to baptize this guy? Would you really want to baptize this little guy and make him into a Christian? How would you even get him to do that? I mean, it was just, I thought it was a joke. Should we consider baptizing extraterrestrials? I was like, oh man, I would shut this website off. I think I'm hallucinating.
What does Catholic mean, BD? Catholic means
universal.
There you go.
I know.
They've always been interested in this.
I know. I was brought up Catholic. I know the whole routine. But
it brings me back to the moment about studying Mesoamerica prior to Catholicism, and that there was this great fight where, like, the priests wanted to baptize the natives, but the conquistadores who brought over the priests were like, no, you're not doing that, because if we have to recognize them as children of God, then they get to keep their land.
Right.
We want their land. That's why we're not going to baptize them. We need them to stay savage. So there was this whole infighting because they didn't want to give back the land to the natives, because once you were to baptize them, then obviously they can claim,
really
the land.
Rights to it. Yep. Yeah, they got it all figured out, don't they? I mean, so anyway, what we have to look forward to are probably misdirected warnings of asteroids striking the Earth, and the end is near, and there's nothing we could do about stuff falling from the sky. And so I was tempted to retitle this show Cardinal Chicken Little, The Sky is Falling, but I decided to leave it the way it was. I was happy with the way it was.
Well, BD, I had a question real quick. What do you think about comets? We've talked a lot about asteroids. What about the comets that are sort of moving through our solar system as well?
I think they're subject to the same type of fear porn that the asteroids or the meteorites or the meteor showers are, which is manipulation of people thinking they're going to strike or they're going to come too close. I think knowing that the reach of the Vatican into the universe now is very disturbing, because you cannot trust the information coming out of there anymore. There's an agenda behind it. They want to control origin theory. They want to control ending theory. The rapture is coming. I just saw this morning, an article talking about the possibility of 2 asteroids coming too close to the Earth's, orbit, stratosphere rather. And I was like, how do you know if that's true anymore? You don't know. You don't know who's putting that up there. It never happens. And it calls to mind an incident that happened a while ago when I was working in New York some years ago. There was an object in space. I think it was some kind of satellite called Skylab. And Skylab had done a certain amount of information gathering, and then it discontinued, and it was to fall into the ocean. And at that time, we didn't know that much about GPS and tracking. So they said that they lost track of Skylab's trajectory, and they weren't sure where it was going to land. So for about a whole week, and I was in New York City at the time, it captured the whole nation's imagination. Where is Skylab? Where is it going to fall? Oh my God, if it lands in the city, it could destroy buildings. It could hit a utility and cause an explosion. It could kill people. We don't know where it's going to land. And people for maybe 1 to 2 weeks, it was the talk of Johnny Carson. It was on the night shows. People were making jokes about it. They were doing skits about it. Finally, Skylab lands in some field somewhere, very remote, nothing close to civilization. And people for that time before it landed were actually afraid. And I think the whole thing was a psyop to take the pulse of people and how they respond to this kind of information. Something's falling from the sky. We don't know where it's going to land, which is ridiculous. They knew they had a tracker on that. Don't tell me they weren't tracking the descent back to Earth.
Right. And it's such an easy narrative.
And yeah,
the sky is falling, Chicken Little.
That's exactly right. So I remembered Skylab when I was doing this research. And I was like, back then we believed that they didn't know where it was going to land. Now I would say, oh, bullshit, don't even waste my time. But back then we did not have that knowledge, which in a way saves us now. I think it's a very good sign that we're questioning this stuff now. We're putting it out there and we're exposing it. Back then people were not doing that. We were just buying the official line. But I remember that happening in Skylab, and it was people were talking about making Skylab products. It was becoming commercialized. So
there's that whole Deep Impact. There's a whole series of movies all about these things falling from the sky.
Right. Yeah, well, I think this went back to when they had that the whole thing about the alien invasion, the War of the Worlds, and that radio show in 1938. That was a psyop to measure the public's response.
I think so.
To that. And what happened was, I did some research on that a couple of years ago. They said that it happened in New Jersey, which is funny because it wasn't far from where I lived. And people panicked and people were driving crazy and people were racing to get home and people were looking up at the sky and people were committing suicide. It really didn't happen. What happened was they reported that was happening to take the pulse of the reaction of other people in the country. People in New Jersey were not panicking about it. They thought it was happening somewhere else. So the element of psyop fits into this whole astral thing, unfortunately, with comets, meteorites, asteroids, things passing through the Earth's atmosphere. So finding out that the Jesuit-based Vatican is behind this and supervising it and controlling it just tells us all we need to know. Yeah. There's an agenda afoot. We really can't put our faith in it. And, they're preempting the universe, which I personally take offense at because that's what I study.
I think when it comes to like NASA and outer space, I really do think like kind of what I was saying before about you got a lot of alchemists that were into this shit in the past. I think you're just getting like a ciphered story from like just master alchemists. That's about it. If you happen to be lucky to understand what they're saying, you might. I mean, still, I don't think out there is what most people think, but I do think there's something to learn in their stupid shit that they hand us. You know what I thought was interesting, and I wanted to bring this up, and I don't want to forget. And this was actually due to Headless. When I was covering the Gilgo Beach, and I was looking at Rex Heuermann a lot. I remember him. I think he sent me something about Osiris Rex, and that was popping up in the news the same time. Mm-hmm. Gilgo Beach was like popping up again.
Oh yeah, right.
I was like, this is so weird because like King and like Rex Heuermann technically was killing whores in Babylon, in the town of Babylon. Mm-hmm. And then you got Osiris Rex flying through the sky, and it's just like, what's going on here? And then when you have NASA telling you that, right? Which is an encoded message, in my opinion, you have to say,
absolutely.
You're talking about Rex, and we got this guy slaying whores.
I really want to know the relationship between NASA and the Vatican now. I'm sure that that's a huge history topic right there, is because there has to be a big crossover. They're taking orders from one another, it seems.
Oh, for sure. Yes. And actually, the way it was stated here was NASA has past experience collaborating with the epicenter of the Roman Catholic faith. They don't say how far in the past. I would say it goes back as far as they probably began. I don't know when NASA started, probably one of the 1947 phenomena that we talked about, but that's probably when, because by then, since the 1500s, the Vatican's involved in astronomical research, and along comes NASA. I'm sure they were one of the first sponsors.
I think the Vatican is NASA's sugar daddy.
Yeah, that's how they got Osiris Rex to Bennu. Was the Vatican sponsored that?
Right.
NASA was struggling to get it off the ground. Vatican came along and said, "Oh, here, there's a few $1 million. We'll take care of it for you."
And again, if nobody had any of the context with any of this stuff, they would just take this as normal. They would just pass right over the headlines.
I know. That's how you become numb to certain things, and you just sort of take them at face value. You don't look beyond the name. You don't think, what is Osiris was an Egyptian god. Should I be paying more attention to this? Rex means king. What are they talking? People don't look beyond the facade of things. That's where the problem starts, because it's always in our faces. It's always in plain sight. If you know where to look and how to look, it's right in your face. That's why sometimes it just makes me laugh. It's like, oh my God, it's right in my face. And they're getting away with this time and again. We just need to keep talking about it. That's why we do these shows.
Yes. Yeah, I do think it is constantly blasted in our faces.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Because like a lot of it, I think of just part of the magic really is just catching your attention and getting you to think something. So it's going to be in your face to get your attention.
Well, there's the idea of the memory palace too. So these things might not be noticed consciously, but subconsciously, it's part of your memory palace. It's part of the way you see the world.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Totally.
Yeah.
And sometimes I even wonder, like when I was talking about like the Osiris Rex and like Gilgo, could it even be like the whole Osiris Rex? We just needed to say Rex and get a couple of people thinking that and repeating that before we brought, who knows, before we bring the other one in. Like, is it like gradual energy in introduction with the names and the scenarios? I don't know, but it's definitely
reincarnation.
Yeah,
so there's a concept of like everybody shares in these memories, these ancestral memory pools. I just found out the other day that they had a rat study where they would introduce a stimulus to these rats and then shock them, right? So they had this notes playing, and they would do this over and over again until the rats would actually respond to the stimulus as if they were shocked. Then they used those rats as sperm donors to make a new generation. And what do you know? The new generation responds to the stimulus the same way. They never knew their dads. They never got taught this stuff. So there's an ancestral memory aspect to this. And, for thousands of years, Osiris was the head god. And so you're sort of activating that subconscious ancestral memory, and boom, you're getting the results you want.
Definitely epigenetics at play. It's almost like when you're walking in an actual field or the woods, and you hear or see a shadow fly over. That's us ducking down, remembering the big birds that used to prey upon us. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
Lots
like
of behaviors wrapped up in
ancestral fear. Yeah. Spiders, same thing. Yeah, they're all ancestral.
Butterflies.
That one.
Butterflies,
yes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This would also explain a lot of the human sacrifice, right? Because that's the stimulus, and that's going straight into the collective memory pool, right? So you're just hammering those symbols home before the. That actually brought up something to do with comets, right? So what I found when I was doing research on comets is this mythology. It actually comes from Urantia Trust, right? I don't know if you've heard of the Urantia book. But they have this website, and this was like the very first thing that popped up. It says, first, I will start from a psychological astrology perspective. In Greek mythology, two myths relate to comets. One is the story of Menepe and Metioke and the daughters of Orion. Orion's wife brought up the sisters after the hunter died. So there's that aspect of like, Orion is dead, and these are his offspring. And Athena taught them to weave. Aphrodite gave them beauty. One year, a plague broke out, and the oracle of Apollo decreed the two maidens must be sacrificed. The sisters offered themselves and ended their lives by stabbing themselves with a weaving shuttle.
Ow.
Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the underworld, pitied them and changed them into comets and meteorites. This is where the word meteor comes from.
That's interesting.
So comets are always associated with like the death of a king, right? Like Halley's Comet is associated with that. And so you've got these huge death cycles that are making this giant ellipse throughout the solar system. And once they come into view, something big starts to change.
Well, even if you think about a comet in a sense, that's kind of like almost like the ending of a zodiac. You know how like how you'll have like the Aries would be the beginning, and then Leo, and then shows you know whatever. Wow.
But just like we were talking
You know how
about with
there's like different phases though, and like one's kind of like burning out and ending right at the end. So I could see like maybe the comet actually showing like the destruction and then a rebirth, which is why you go into something else.
Well, that goes back into the mythology again. So Atropos is the fate that cuts the string. And what they were stabbed with is the knitting shuttle. So you're talking about the string of fate coming back together again. And as they're stabbing themselves, obviously there's the death angle, right? So all of those things come back into play, and you've got yourself a sigil again, you know?
Yeah, true.
Oh.
And then there was that case of the Marshall Applewhite in that group.
Heaven's Gate.
Where the Heaven's Gate, where they waited for the comet to approach, become closer to Earth, and they all, 39 of them supposedly committed suicide to go join beyond the comet. Yeah, to go on the comet. That was wild. But that guy, I swear, was mind controlled. I mean, they all had eyes bugging out of their heads, like
he looked
bugging out of the sockets. I thought, oh, these people were mind controlled.
They were big into castration, auto castration.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was when they went.
It looked like they all had Graves' disease.
I thought so. I think these people have thyroid problems. Their eyes are popping out of their sockets. But yeah, I remember that was around the time of the comet. I remember, I don't know if it was the Hale-Bopp. I remember the Hale-Bopp. Yeah. I saw that. That was amazing. I actually saw the Hale-Bopp comet, and I was like, wow, I had never seen a comet. And it just looked like a little thing swishing through the sky, but you could see the motion of the particles in the tail, like, shh. Amazing.
Right. So,
amazing. But I didn't die. Nothing happened to me then. Yeah. So, sorry?
The word means hair in Greek.
Okay.
So all the little hairs coming off the back of it. Again, back to the threads of fate again. So it's like all of this is sort of like the ending of this this tale, because again, it cuts off at the end, and it's moving into the light of the sun, and it changes the sort of how things are refracted on Earth. They used to think it was a cold fire that was burning up in the sky.
Yo, you know what's wild? Hale-Bopp in Hebrew gematria, first thing it matches is sacrifice.
Oh God.
Jesus, that's wild.
There you go.
There you go. There you go.
I mean, that's because of people typed in sacrifice so many times, but that's wild. That's
pretty
wild. Interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, in the ancient times, they used to have these death of a king rituals. And in the sacred grove of Diana in Roman, in where is it called? Lake Nemai, right? They would have the King of the Grove ceremony. You can find this in The Golden Bough by James George Frazer. And what they would do is this convict or escaped slave would climb up to the top of this tree, break a branch off. Again, there's that astrological symbolism of the pine tree and breaking the top branch, and then bring it down and challenge the King of the Grove. And they would fight to the death, and whoever won would be the new King of the Grove. And this was done all the way up until Nero's time, when he started to rig the game, sort of. But all of this was associated with Diana, this being about the moon, right? And so the moon associated with this, Artemis type energy, you get all sorts of other associations going on in that direction. But also
Saturn is the pine. Pine is Saturn, the pine tree and the pine cone and the pineal gland as well. Go. So you have Moon and Saturn in that ritual.
Right. And what we have on top of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. is a depiction of Artemis. And she's overlooking the reflecting pool. Lake Nemai is called Diana's reflecting pool. So we've got that King of the Grove ceremony going on in Washington, D.C. And what did they do when they impeached Trump? They had a funeral procession going from one house to the Senate. And so you've got all of these elements of the dying king ritual right there in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol building.
Wow.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
Was there anything else you wanted to cover, BD?
No, I think that about wraps it up for me.
All right, yeah, I think we can wrap it up there. Then it'll actually be a perfectly timed episode, hour and a half. Nice,
Excellent.
thank you. Yeah, Headless, was there anything you wanted to add real quick?
No, that's a fantastic episode. There's so much more work
Oh.
to be done. This is
Well,
like
we
a
could do
brave
this
new
again. I
frontier.
mean, I cut out a lot of stuff because I was afraid of going way over time and going off onto too many tangents. But I touched on a number of things that we could certainly revisit and have another discussion even in more depth than this.
Sounds good.
So we want to do it again. Let's do it again. I'm game.
This was my favorite collab, just saying.
Yeah, this was
Oh,
really
wow.
fun. Yeah, that
Awesome.
it did really work
Awesome.
out really well. Yeah. Which
Yeah,
is
and like I said, I never envisioned going into the direction I went. I was just going to do prime charts, asteroids, and look where it ended up, to the origin of the universe and the end of the world, and all that good stuff. You never know where it's going to end up, which makes it so much fun.
Well, this
So
is like a
do
hidden
it again.
key. This is a hidden key of astrology, and I think a lot of people
Mhm.
are dying for that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important that I'm happy to put it out there because I'm learning along with everybody else. I mean, I don't consider myself a master of anything, but I know enough about things to tie them together and make sense of them. And I'm still just learning. I just started doing asteroids a few months ago, and all the stuff I've learned already.
Wow.
I'm just scratching the surface. So we just keep going with it.
Yeah, that was fun.
Keep on going with it. I'm
Yeah.
game.
All right, real quick, before we wrap it up, just for to remind people, Headless, where can they find your own work?
You just check me out on X and Instagram, Headless Giant. I post a bunch of weird stuff, and I'm sure I'll keep you entertained.
And you will be live tomorrow night at what, 10 p.m. Eastern?
It's going to be 10 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to be talking about Asclepius and his daughters. One of these asteroids is named Hygeia, which is the daughter of Asclepius. So,
and there's an Asclepius too. There's a number. There's, like I showed you, there's 100 on that page. There's thousands more. Wow. I could just talk about them forever. I mean, that's why we should do this again. Yeah, Hygeia, Icarus, Daedalus, Persephone, Proserpina. You name it, they're in there.
List. I was like, oh my god! I was like, really? I didn't know there was fucking giants.
Oh god! I thought there were 4,000. The latest count is 8,000.
I think I saw Hecate, and I was like, no, really?
Hecate, yeah, she was in there. She was in there. Hera is in there.
Fuck it, let's just be up.
Just name a Greek god. They're in there.
Right.
Some of them, they sound so fancy. You're like, what the fuck does that
mean?
This goes straight into alchemy too, because the alchemists believed that our souls had to transmute from all of these planets down to Earth, and this is one of those hidden keys of alchemy too.
Yes. Yeah, we need to keep talking about it. Yeah,
I like that.
For sure.
All right, and BD, real quick, let everybody know where they can find your stuff again.
My Linktree, X, Instagram, and strangebutTrueCrime.com.
Awesome. All right, I have everybody's links in the bottom. Thank you, everybody in the chat. That was a great chat as usual. That's why I like to go live. Again, for people, I do throw up some of the comments that are in the chat up on the screen. So if you are able to watch, I highly suggest to watch. Especially, we also did have things up on the screen to look at. So if you're catching this late and you're going to watch the replay, I highly suggest to watch the video if you can. If you're catching the audio, I guess at this point it's too late. You already saw it. But if you want to go back and catch it on the video, it's on YouTube, BitChute, and Rumble. And that's it. I had a great time. And again, thank you everybody in the chat. That's what's up. And that's the end of another Cult Rejects. Later.